Awesome. All right, good afternoon, everyone, and happy Victory Monday for those who celebrate. The Cleveland Browns did not break my heart for the second time this fall, and I am taking that as a sign of how this week will go. My name is Hope Lane Gavin, and I serve as the Director of Nutrition Policy and Programs with the Ohio Association of Foodbanks. I want to thank you all for spending your lunch hour with us to learn more about the important topic of student basic needs. This is an issue the Ohio Association of Food Banks and its network has been working diligently on for the past several years, diving into the data, identifying advocacy opportunities to increase SNAP access for Ohio's college students, and connecting our hunger relief network with campus pantries to ensure students have access to a wide variety of nutritious product and services. We are thrilled to be able to share some of these findings with you today. This afternoon, you can expect to hear more about what the data and research says about the state of college student basic needs security, both across the country and here in our Great Lakes region. You will also hear what the policy opportunities are, both federally and at our very own state house, to make meaningful improvements to basic needs security for the next generation of our workforce. I'm excited to introduce our first speaker, Mark Huelsman, who serves as the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Hope Center with Temple University. I am super excited to introduce Mark as I have been following his work since I became involved and invested in this movement. Mark has a storied career in higher education research with an emphasis on college retention, affordability, and access. Mark and the Hope Center are true leaders in this space, elevating their research and data nationwide to inform and advocate for systemic policy change to make college more affordable and accessible by securing college students' basic needs. So without further ado, Mark, take it away.
Thank you, Hope and Sarah and everyone. That was a wonderful introduction, and I have to admit I started very salty with the Victory Monday chat because I am a Bengals fan. I am an Ohio native. I live in DC and I work for a Philadelphia institution, so I've got a lot of swirling emotions after this weekend's drubbing by the Philadelphia Eagles. So hearing it from my colleagues, and I was a little bit salty that I had to open today with a Browns fan rubbing it in as well. So I will collect myself. Really appreciate it. Go sports, indeed. As mentioned, I'm Mark Huelsman. I am the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Hope Center for Student Basic Needs. We are, as Hope mentioned, a research, policy and advocacy and sort of technical assistance center at Temple University focused on addressing the student basic needs crisis in higher education, addressing the sort of full cost of college facing students and addressing sort of the intersection between our safety net public benefit programs and higher education. So I'm here to talk a little bit about our data and research and some of our policy work, which is kind of the side of the house that I focus on. So if we want to go to the next slide, and I'll do the next slide routine for Sarah. I think it's important to ground us a little bit in continuing to ensure that we know who college students are today. So, our survey data, we do a lot of surveying of institutions across the country. Several other organizations do this. There's nationally representative federal data as well, showing that the concept of the traditional college student, someone who is, coming straight from high school, someone who gets parental or family support to go to college, someone who's living on campus. That is not the experience of students today, and frankly hasn't been for some time. So updating our priors about who students are and what their experiences are and what they're facing is essential to understanding the student basic needs crisis that we'll get into, but also just the policy solutions to go into it, because so many of our policies, programs at the institutional, state, and federal level have this lens of students as this, this unit that's kind of what we think of as what used to be the college student. And it never really was the case, but our policy assumptions really do make some faulty assumptions about students, who students are. So these are numbers from our survey data that is coming out in the next month. So not even hot off the presses, pre presses for you all, but What our survey data finds is that the majority of students in higher education are non-white. About 1 in 4 are parenting students. Almost half are over the age of 25, and the vast majority are juggling employment, coursework, working while in school. And actually, most of the students we survey are first-generation college students. So these are students who face a very different set of experiences and hurdles in affording the rising cost of higher education and sort of meeting their basic needs while they're enrolled. So next slide, please. This is a preview. Again, you're all very, very fortunate to see a preview of our upcoming survey that should be out again within the next few weeks. But we surveyed about 75,000 students across 16 states. A little under 100 schools completed what we call our Student Basic Needs Survey between January of last year and July of this year. So it's an oversample of 2-year colleges, an oversample of minority serving institutions and rural serving, well, not an overserving, but oversampling, but a lot of rural serving institutions as well. And we find very, very, very high and prevalent rates and consistent rates of food insecurity and basic needs insecurity on campus, in addition to addressing or dealing with mental health challenges, which we know are directly related in sort of a two-way street with material basic needs insecurity. So we find about half experience housing insecurity, about 1 in 7 experience homelessness, and 4 in 10 experience food insecurity. And if you look at national data, federal nationally representative data on this, you see, very high rates of food insecurity, housing insecurity as well, or homelessness as well. So this is something that is not a pandemic problem. It's not something that just came about over the last few years. It's not an inflation problem. It's something that's been consistent for as long as we have been tracking it and other organizations have been tracking it, but obviously has been very pronounced and concerning among specific populations of students, especially those who have been hit hardest by the rising cost of living or the pandemic or sort of any economic crisis that sort of is thrown at us every few years. So next slide. And it's not just data. I think I'm as guilty of it as anyone and getting wrapped up in the numbers, but we are fortunate enough to collect stories and quotes and testimonials from students at institutions that are employing our survey. And this one was one that just stuck out at me because I think it's so comprehensive. And I'll read it quickly. This is an anonymous student quote, who said, "It's challenging to be a student with good grades when you're just focused on surviving, worrying about how you'll pay the rent and the bills and the food, working to ensure you have the basic needs instead of focusing on homework and studying for your classes." And I thought, if I did an AI generated quote of the student basic needs crisis, it wouldn't distill it better than this. And it's real. It's not AI generated. I promise. Someone actually said this. But it says it so perfectly, right? It's someone who's struggling with all of the basic costs of living, right? And it's someone who's explicitly saying, this is taking me away from the reason I am here, right? It's taking me away from my homework and my studying and focusing on good grades and just getting ahead, right? It's something that, because it's not met, it's distracting me in so many ways, and this is the sort of root of the struggle. So if we care about educational attainment, if we care about helping people get whatever educational pathway they want, right, whether that's an apprenticeship, a community college program, a 4-year degree, a grad degree, we need to make sure, again, it's a very basic hierarchy of needs thing. We need to make sure that we're meeting the basic costs that they have so they can focus on those things, right? That's how we build a sort of durable, dynamic student body, middle class, democracy, you name it. So next slide, please. And this is all happening in the context of a pretty large increase in not just cost of attendance, but unmet need facing students, across the country, but certainly in the state of Ohio. So if you look at Ohio public 4-year colleges, the net price for students, that's after they get grant and scholarship aid, that's after they're sort of, taking into account any sort of family resources. The net price each year for public college students in Ohio is a little over $18,000. So that's, multiplied over 4 or sometimes more years, depending on how long students take to get to the finish line. That's an incredible chunk of money to meet. Again, this is after the Pell Grant is taken into account. And again, this is interactive. The Pell Grant covers the lowest level that it's ever covered in terms of cost of attendance. The purchasing power of the Pell Grant and need-based financial aid is not nearly what it used to be when it was incepted. And the whole point of the Pell Grant was to equalize affordability and opportunity and financial need for low income students who can receive it. We also, our economic and safety net response to the pandemic was certainly not perfect in many ways across the country, but we had a pretty robust set of federal supports to help working families, to help low income families, and to help those who are impacted by the pandemic, including in higher education. We had, for the first time ever, billions of dollars in emergency aid, sort of no questions asked aid for students that they could use to meet basic needs, to pay off debt, to stay enrolled in school. We had the expanded child tax credit. We expanded SNAP eligibility and benefits for folks. We had a set of responses within the pandemic context that, while again, I'm the first to say they weren't perfect, but they were very successful. The problem is they were fleeting, right? Over the past couple of years, in an environment when the cost of living has increased, when families are sort of squeezed by their, by any number of sort of financial factors, we've seen these supports go away. So that's the sort of context we're dealing in which we see sort of rising or at least persistent food insecurity on campus. Next slide. So just going from where we are, right? Students are experiencing this crunch. We've seen massive, pretty gargantuan levels of basic needs and insecurity for a long time now. This is the point of public policy to sort of address and fix this at the federal level, at the state level, sometimes local, and certainly institutional level as well. The problem is public policy, both in our higher education system and in our kind of public benefit programs, is not designed for students, and in fact has explicit rules to really lock students out of receiving supports based on, again, some really faulty assumptions about who students were, right? If you assume that a student just looks temporarily poor, if you assume that a student deserves to struggle financially when they're on campus, if you assume that students are a relatively privileged class of individuals and they're going to be okay, you're not going to design policies to reflect the moment or meet the moment in terms of the hunger that we do see on campus. So policy just generally isn't designed for students, and I'll go into sort of one major example, which is not going to be surprising. Thank you. Next slide. Which is the SNAP program. Again, I'm talking to a bunch of hunger advocates. I don't need to belabor the comprehensiveness and the impact of SNAP on families' lives and on reducing hunger. But SNAP is our single biggest and most successful anti-hunger intervention in this country. We know that when it comes to higher education, benefits access like SNAP is linked to positive student outcomes, right? Again, not rocket science. If you give people enough material, basic needs security, you're going to see an impact potentially on their retention, on their completion, on things like mental health, which we're again seeing a much, much stronger link between material basic needs insecurity, the ability to make sure you have food on the table, and mental health. Again, two ways, right? Mental health is going to impact your basic needs insecurity, and basic needs insecurity is going to impact your mental health. So we know that SNAP holds the potential for students and certainly families across the country to reduce that burden, both sort of financially and from a food perspective and from sort of a higher level perspective as well. Next slide. Unfortunately, every piece of information that we know, and in part this is by design, we know that students are not accessing SNAP. So the Government Accountability Office, which is sort of the watchdog organization, research organization for the federal government, came out a few months ago with a really illuminating and incredibly important study looking at student access to SNAP, and they found, based on 2020 data, which was the latest data that we had, that about 4 million, 3.8 million students across the country are experiencing food insecurity. That's about 1 in 4 students. Unfortunately, so there's this huge pool of students who are food insecure, who could benefit from something like SNAP, and again, other interventions that we see on campus. But 67% of students who are potentially eligible for SNAP, who are likely meeting the eligibility criteria, are not receiving benefits. So it's 2 in 3 who are likely eligible to begin with. We'll go into the sort of fact that many aren't eligible. But 2 in 3 that are eligible are not receiving benefits. And I think even more alarming to me is that students who were both reporting food insecurity and likely eligible were not receiving benefits. So that's 6 in 10 students who are crying out for help, are eligible for a program to help alleviate that burden, and are not receiving benefits. So something is deeply, deeply wrong, both with the rules and the implementation of the program. Next slide. This is from a different survey, but sort of same time frame. And we've, with the Hope Center, has surveyed sort of why students aren't accessing SNAP. So we found that most students did not use, and over half had heard of but didn't use it. So there's a maybe a ping in someone's brain, or maybe they've heard that SNAP exists, but they didn't use it. There's a quarter who haven't heard of it at all, which is fairly alarming. But I think there's sort of a positive and a negative spin on this, that if most students have heard of but did not use, there's potentially an avenue to make sure that, say, reaching out to students and doing some really good benefits outreach to show that, and connecting students to say, like, oh, you've heard of this, you actually might be eligible, right? You might be able to receive benefits, and helping them enroll, apply, reapply. There's a huge chunk of students that might benefit from really, really good targeted outreach and sort of simplification of the program, again, at the federal, state, and institutional level. Next slide. And then most of the time you look at why students didn't use campus benefits. The number one reason cited is, I don't think I'm eligible. So even students are internalizing and often getting really crappy information from somewhere, right? That, oh, that's not a benefit for you. You're not eligible. There was sort of my biggest anecdote on this was the USDA's website on students and SNAP used to say the words, students are not eligible for SNAP unless ... It was like really negative framing. It wasn't asset framing. We know there's an ability for students to access these benefits, but even the federal government was saying, no, you can't get it unless you do these things, right? Which seems so simple, but it's so indicative of the way we think about SNAP and how students internalize it. So they think financial aid is the only sort of recourse for them, whether that's the Pell Grant or grants and scholarships. Next slide. Um, I don't think I need to belabor the SNAP eligibility rules, but everyone needs to meet them, including students. And I think one of the things that we have to do a better job of with policymakers is there's kind of an assumption that if we open up the eligibility criteria or simplify the rules for SNAP for students, which I'll get into in a second, that there's just going to be all of these sort of wealthy individual students who are going to be attending Ivy League campuses or sort of prestigious private liberal arts colleges in Ohio, say, and are just going to be living, off of SNAP benefits. It's a sentiment that is really pernicious. It's obviously wrong for all of the reasons we can imagine it's wrong, but it exists. So it's good to remember that any student who is eligible currently still needs to meet the SNAP eligibility rules. They have to have net income below the federal poverty line. They have to have gross income below 130% of the poverty line, or more in a little bit more in some states. There's an asset test, right? Sort of that, again, we'd love to get rid of, but these things exist. It's hard to get public benefits in America. We're not, despite sort of narratives that you see out there. And again, Theresa, that's a very good point. The asset limit is terrible. And exists and creates just terrible incentives for families. We can get into that conversation as well. But students aren't this special class of folks who wouldn't need to meet it. So next slide. Students also, on top of all these things, it's basically the only, or one of the only populations of folks who have to meet that original criteria and then have to meet another set of hurdles, right? And this is by design. So students attending higher ed more than half time have to meet an additional exemption. Usually it's working more than 20 hours a week in paid employment. I go back to the student quote, right? Making folks work an over half-time job, sometimes a full-time job, to meet their basic needs in order to get financial support to put food on the table impacts retention and completion. There's good research showing that having students work more than 15 hours a week is going to be detrimental. So we're being counterproductive in this. There's also 3 different exemptions that students could meet if they're a parenting student, whether you have a child under 6, whether you lack necessary childcare and they're 6 to 11, whether you're a single parent and taking care of a child under 12. It's ridiculous. It's not it's sort of the worst combination of inequity and bureaucratic red tape that we have. And so it doesn't really serve anybody. It doesn't serve the students. It doesn't serve the institutions or the state agencies having to implement these rules. And it doesn't serve the federal bureaucracy, which has to sort of keep track of this incredibly arduous whack-a-mole process in terms of communicating it with states and students. It doesn't really serve anybody. Next slide. Sorry, I highlighted the 3 parenting exemptions there as well, because that's the one that just really fries me. Like, why we have that is sort of a particularly good example of why we need to change it. Next slide. We have sort of expanded eligibility in recent times. So I mentioned the sort of COVID era uh, exemptions for students and the SNAP eligibility expansions. In December of 2021, on a bipartisan basis, I might add, there were two new exemptions added, which sounds like it's overcomplicating the program, but actually simplified it because there were two new larger classes of students that could sort of bypass that 20-hour work, exemption, and if they were income eligible, could access SNAP through different ways. That was students who had very, very low incomes at $0 expected family contribution on their FAFSA, and students eligible for work study, not just students who were receiving work study. It expanded the pool of potentially eligible students by upwards of 3 million. We're still trying to figure out exactly how many students accessed the SNAP via those exemptions. We're looking to the GAO, Congress, and others to help us out with that. And others have sort of done some research on this, but it did, we have on a bipartisan basis expanded SNAP for students in the past. Even if it with a week until the election, it doesn't seem like that type of thing is possible. We've done it very recently. Next slide. Um, I actually went through this. The student rules are based on outdated assumptions, but this is the sort of burden that we have to overcome when it comes to addressing student hunger. Um, I'll just point to the last one. I mean, I think that we know that there's this sort of pernicious assumption that students are undeserving, that they just look temporarily poor, that they're all receiving this secret amount of financial support from their parents that's not showing up somewhere. But the last one I think is really important, that policymakers don't think of going to school as work. They don't think of it as a vocation or something that is that students have to commit time, energy, and resources to. And again, everything we know about the 4 in 10 students attempting to get a credential through community colleges, workforce training programs, even the most of the students at public colleges, we know that it is work. Anybody who's been through school itself and took it seriously, that it's work. So that's sort of something, a sort of cultural thing we have to break down among a set of policymakers who predominantly went to elite institutions and received financial support from their parents themselves. Next slide. I won't go through all of these, but there is a set of things that federal policymakers could do, starting with reforming the SNAP student rules, removing student restrictions, putting higher education on level footing with those in the workforce, simplifying the student exemptions, and really doing a good job of removing administrative burden and improving awareness, take up outreach. There's data sharing stuff they can do. There's expanding data collection. There's removing burdensome requirements that trip up students who are eligible, are trying to apply, and get sort of tripped up through bureaucracy or just not great management of the program. There's also other things outside of SNAP that can sort of think about improving not just benefit outreach, but comprehensive approaches to addressing basic needs. There's a federal basic needs grant that's very, very small that institutions can apply to do things like set an ecosystem of supports that includes helping students access benefits, building campus food pantries, building all of the interventions that we know are both sort of work as a triage and also on a long-term basis to help students get on level footing financially. And then, there's things like emergency aid for students. We know that things happen, and students should be able to sort of access, a few $100s here and there or more to address something that otherwise would mean they drop out of school, miss classes, not be able to take care of their kids, things like that. Next slide. And there's things that states are already doing. It just as I know we're focusing on one state, Ohio here, but there's plenty of things that states have started to do, whether that's a Department of Higher Education, student aid commissions, some state agencies have done a good job of beginning to do really comprehensive outreach to students, and we're seeing an impact, right? So, some of these are screenshots of emails and forms that we've seen sent to students, like, "Hey, you might be eligible to get up to a couple hundred more dollars every month in groceries. Hey, college is expensive. This Department of Higher Education is urging you to see if you qualify for SNAP. Work with your campus offices to make sure that we're leaving no stone unturned if you have unmet financial need." We're starting to see more of that go on at the campus level and certainly at a state level across institutions or departments of higher ed and state agencies. Next slide. And again, we can talk a little bit about this, but campuses, obviously, in the absence of federal support, we know that campuses are doing things like centralizing basic needs centers, hiring benefits navigators to help students get through the alphabet soup of benefits that they might be eligible for, surveying students on the state of basic needs and insecurity. We're obviously partial to doing this. We do it ourselves, but really knowing the pockets of where students are experiencing, and frankly, when they're experiencing food insecurity on your campus, can help you build interventions to sort of, do some preemptive medicine or preventative medicine on your campus as well to help students, again, avoid the pitfalls that we know are going to lead them to drop out. And I mentioned sort of leveraging the data that we have. Knowing the amount of low income students on your campus will help you conduct outreach to folks who may be eligible for SNAP, right? Filling that SNAP gap where we know the 2 and 3 students nationwide who are eligible or are likely eligible are not receiving benefits. So there's plenty that campuses can do as well. And the federal government has created guidance to sort of help them or urge them in that direction. Next slide. And then I'm done, I swear. But there's a long way to go on campus outreach. This is from our partners at the Today's Students Coalition, formerly called Higher Learning Advocates, which showed that very few colleges, or about 1 in 4, are actually conducting direct outreach to about federal benefit programs to students. So there's a lot that many campuses can still do. They're sort of building the muscle memory to do this. So it hasn't been that long since the federal government sort of proactively started urging folks to do this, but there's a long way to go. So that's the sort of advocacy on the campus level that we can do to make sure that you're connecting the data that you have about low-income students with, helping those kind of folks potentially, get connected to other benefits like SNAP. So I think that's it for me. Yes, thank you. Sorry, I went on a little too long. There's a lot of data. There's a lot of things. I wanted to go federal, state, and campus a little bit, but really appreciate it. I'm going to ship it back to Hope.
Appreciate you so much, Mark. That was great. I was taking notes myself, so I learned something new today. So I hope our audience did too. Appreciate you dearly. And there's his contact information. And if anybody didn't get to grab it, we will put it in the chat, and you can also follow up with Sarah. She would be happy to connect you. So our next speaker is Theresa Anderson. She's a principal research associate with Urban Institute, a think tank that conducts economic and social policy research with hopes of elevating the debate on social and economic policy. Urban Institute has been conducting research on post-secondary student basic needs security in the Great Lakes region to help states design approaches and leverage existing data and insight to identify how they can build more evidence of impact. In other words, Theresa stands to demonstrate student basic needs security is a worthwhile priority and investment for policymakers, for advocates, and for others of influence. So Theresa, take it away.
Thank you so much, Hope, and thank you so much, Mark, for that fabulous stage setting. I am Theresa Anderson. As Hope mentioned, I'm a senior researcher at the Urban Institute. And I am primarily going to talk today about an initiative that we have been helping coordinate in the Great Lakes region, including in Ohio, around supporting college student basic needs security. And I'll just mention that I don't just come at this from DC. I myself am from that state just north of you all, but my husband is a native Ohioan, and my parents actually met on Ohio State campus at summer nerd camp when they were in high school. So, lots of Ohio love on this side of the world here. But I am calling into you right now from Arlington, Virginia. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Urban Institute. Hope gave a really nice summary. And then talk a bit about the initiative that we're working on and be great. So next slide. The Urban Institute is a national nonprofit policy research organization, been around for over 50 years, founded in 1968. The org is based in Washington, D.C., but especially since the pandemic, but even before, we're really all over the place, including having members of our team in Madison, Wisconsin, and other parts of the region. The tagline of Urban is to elevate the debate through quality policy analysis and research. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, while I'd say that the questions that we ask sometimes are thought of as progressive because we are oriented towards trying to help make things better for people who have structures or systems that can sometimes make things harder for them. We try to do that in a way that's bipartisan, inclusive, and thoughtful, in particular around trying to do that in partnership with local leaders and experts and community members and others. One thing that often comes up is called the Urban Institute. Obviously, people say, are you just in urban areas? We do work both urban, suburban, rural, area is actually a lot of work in rural areas. And so if you want to learn more about the organization, there's our website has a lot of good info. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about the project. So if you want to go to the next slide. So there is Urban has a long history of work on social safety net, higher education support, student parent, and other related kind of policy issues. So in late 2022, we launched a preliminary scan of policy level or structural strategies that are being undertaken in the 6 Midwest Great Lakes states to alleviate students' basic needs insecurity. So when I think about like policy level structural strategies, it's kind of moving, a level up from institutions to systems, partnerships, policy changes and structures. We certainly have seen that with the Hunger-Free Campus efforts in Ohio, and some of the SNAP policy change in the state as well. But trying to think about kind of understand a bit of what was happening in Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin with support from Joyce Foundation and ECMC Foundation. And from that initial landscape scan, we convened a small convening of state delegations in early June in Chicago, where the attendees expressed a really strong interest in building a regional community of practice to be able to learn from each other, talk about strategies. Folks were very interested in the anti-hunger work that was happening in Ohio. But we are thinking about basic needs across the spectrum, which I'll talk about in a moment. And we're working on launching a community of practice now, as I said, sort of at that kind of policy level with in partnership with policy and technical assistance organizations that are also doing work within states and across the region. So next slide shows just a little bit of the landscaping that we did. This is just a summary of some of the quantitative insights. So looking across the Great Lakes states, we just pulled some data points primarily from the National Post-Secondary Student Aid Study, but also from the IPEDS, looking at the rate of food insecurity, which ranged from 18 to 24%. You'll see our Ohio column is blue there, kind of falls right in the middle. We also looked at the portion of students who had unmet financial need after aid, between 43 and 50%. So that's, about half, and Ohio is right in there. About half of students have unmet financial need after aid, and a fair portion of those students have a pretty substantial amount of unmet need. I didn't break that out on this slide just for space, but there's a lot more detail in the case studies that I'll talk about in a moment, or the little fact sheets. We also see, a concerningly high rate of students who are actively unhoused or homeless in the previous 30 days, ranging from 6 to 10%, with Ohio being at 8%. And again, this is based on student survey data. It's possible that some of this is, underreported. I wouldn't expect it to be overreported, but could be underreported. And finally, looking at students who have dependent children, this is an area I do a lot of work on, student parents in particular, but students with dependent children. The definition of that's survey. So ranging anywhere from 15 to 25% across the region. Ohio is kind of right in the common level of about 15% based on this survey, though there's some reasons to think that this survey might have underestimated student parents to some degree. Just kind of giving that bit of context around kind of where the state falls from the national survey data that are available. And then if we go to the next slide. Some summaries so we did a series of interviews with folks across the state to just get a sense of kind of the landscape around student basic needs supports and efforts. So first, kind of taking stock of the different higher education bodies in the state. There's, of course, the Ohio Department of Higher Education, the Ohio Association of Community Colleges, the Inter-University Council of Ohio, the Association of Independent Colleges, Universities of Ohio, and the Ohio Technical Centers. And a few highlights of the work that's happening across the state that might include others, including like the Office of Jobs. Oh my gosh, the OJT, Office of
Job and Family Services.
Thank you, Job
Yeah.
and Family Services. Thank you so much. And others within the state. But of course, within the food space, they're highlighted the Hunger Free Campus Coalition, which I know many of you are pushing forward actively. There's also, I know that the Hope Center survey has been a real resource, but also a lot of colleges have used the Trellis Student Financial Wellness Survey to collect data and be able to understand student well-being. Both the Hope Center survey and the Trellis survey are fabulous resources to be able to get a pulse of student needs at the campus level. Financial support, so Ohio's Community College Acceleration Program rose to the top as a highlight. There's nice navigation through Ohio's Career Navigator website. And there's also finally this comprehensive case management and employment program, mostly for youth, and that's through the Office of Jobs and Family Services within the state. But a few highlights of things that are happening, as well as some neat partnerships, including Ohio Reach, the Campus Compact, and the ODHE and Ohio Department of Jobs and Family Services partnership. And there's the name I was looking for right there on the slide. But we also heard about some opportunities. And again, these are opportunities that came from the conversations with folks in the state. I'm sorry, I'm fighting off a cat who really thinks that this is her moment to hit my computer with her head. So some of the opportunities are to leverage partnership with nonprofits, non-governmental organizations, and existing networks. I know many of you come from some of those potential and current partners. Updating student basic needs data so that there's something more coherent and consistent available across the state, so that institutions and decision makers at higher levels can be able to respond appropriately to student needs in a reasonable time frame and connect those to outcomes to be able to understand the effectiveness of different strategies to support basic needs security. Enhancing childcare and food security were two of the biggest areas of priority that were elevated in the state. But we, when talking about basic needs, also talked about, of course, housing, income, technology support, which is necessary for higher ed, health and mental health, in addition, of course, to food, childcare, and then things like clothing and school supplies may also be considered basic needs, depending on kind of the framing. And then finally, increasing student awareness of existing resources. Mark pointed to that in his commentary about SNAP, and where we saw that many students were, about a quarter of students had never even heard of SNAP, which I thought was pretty interesting. I myself used to work at U.S. Department of Agriculture in the Economic Research Service on SNAP, and was like, oh, this is definitely something that is the low-hanging fruit to try to get folks to be more aware of what is available. So with that, next slide. So do not squint at this, but this is just the 2-page summary of that initial landscape scan. It's available at this website. You can see those little QR code. You can read more. That QR code will take you to the website that actually has the landscape scan for all 6 of the states, as well as a cross-cutting one. And these are just 2 pages. That's why I put it on the slides. You can see it's pretty quick, and hopefully can be a point of reference for you all, but also potentially something that can be, put in front of other folks who may have limited time, but may need kind of a nice quick snapshot of where the opportunities are and what the situation is in relation to college student basic needs security in the state. Next slide. So just a few things on our next steps. So we are working on developing this community of practice, as I mentioned. This is going to include, it's a pretty targeted state delegations to focus again on this kind of like capital P policy level, but bringing folks together quarterly to share ideas and connect with policy and technical assistance partners across the region. Urban will be working with state teams to identify goals and learning and research strategies to be able to learn from the work and be able to show what is effective for others. We'll be working to increase resources and attention towards this work throughout the region, and helping kind of potentially, hopefully, if everything goes to plan, be able to funnel some more external philanthropic resources into initiatives that are promising. And finally, making the Great Lakes a national example of how policy can support post-secondary pathways by supporting student basic needs. And I think Mark did a great job of setting up why that all those kind of connection points. So I forgot to put a slide that has my contact info at the end of this, but I'm happy to put it in the chat, and I am very glad to connect with anybody in relation to this work or questions or ideas or errors. We are happy for all of it and just really appreciate being able to share space with you all today.
Thanks so much, Theresa. Deeply appreciate you. This is great. Just like Mark, I had stuff I learned from this, so deeply appreciate your time today. Our next speaker is Ohio Association of Foodbanks' very own Sarah Kuhns. Sarah serves as the Ohio Association of Foodbanks Advocacy and Engagement Manager and has been leading the charge at our shop in this space. Not only has Sarah been leading the Hunger-Free Campus work in Ohio, which she'll get into in depth momentarily, she has also dedicated any ounce of free time she can manage to ensuring college campus pantries in Ohio are connected to their local food banks so that they can access more food and more variety at better prices. Sarah is the true definition of an anti-poverty advocate, always ensuring that our work is rooted in those with lived experience with the programs we are trying to improve by working in and with community to elevate our priorities. Sarah's dedication to the mission truly knows no bounds. So with that being said, Sarah, take it away.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much. Thanks, Hope, for that very kind introduction. And thanks all for joining. Like Hope said, I'm Sarah Kuhns. I want to get a little bit into what the Ohio Association of Food Banks is, but also the great work that we're doing in coalition with other partners in this space. So we are Ohio's largest charitable response to hunger. We are essentially the state association for Ohio's 12 Feeding America food banks. And our mission is really to help assist them in providing food and other resources to people in need and to pursue areas of common interest for the benefit of people in need. So, in addition to those 12 Feeding America food banks, we also have in our network 3,600 partner agencies. Those are things like soup kitchens, food pantries, backpack programs, campus pantries, like we're going to be talking about today, and really everything in between. So you can see on this map here, we cover the whole state, all 88 counties. So if you do not have a food bank warehouse in your county, you definitely have a handful of partner agencies or food pantries in your area. I can assure you of that. And you can see kind of how our food banks are kind of split amongst regions. And then relevant to our work today, wanted to talk a little bit about how we're supporting campus pantries. You can see that almost all of our food banks are serving at least one pantry in their region. And, a lot of them are serving multiple. And this is really, we want to support campus pantries and making sure that they're securing enough food for the folks that they are serving, and making sure that they have access to some of the really nutritious foods that we have, while also being sensitive to the fact that, the realities of dorm life living are the realities of living, as a college student, and making sure that the food is really reflected to make sure that there's convenience in mind, and, all the tools that you may need to cook, and to really use the foods that we're providing. So there's that. And I really want to, before I even get into really the details, I really want to make sure that I highlight that we're doing a lot of this work in coalition. We really understand that we are not higher ed experts, and really want to make sure that we are covering really the gamut when it comes to the nuances with this. So you can see a couple of the partners that we've been working with. They are incredibly diverse, between higher ed partners to workforce partners, to health and human service and anti-poverty organizations as well. We really started this work. I can't believe it's only been about a year since we've started this this hunger-free campus work, really with the goal of introducing and supporting a hunger-free campus bill here in Ohio, but it has really kind of evolved into a space where we're able to share best practices, talk about what's happening on college campuses, and really make sure that we're supporting students and campuses, as students earn their degree. So, Mark and Theresa really set the stage very well, but I also wanted to share a couple of stats about Ohio. So, Ohio has almost 200 higher education campuses. That is the sixth largest in the country. Ohio has the ninth largest number of Pell Grant recipients in the country. In Ohio, 62% of students graduate with an average debt of $30,000. And, we learned as we're traveling around the state, Hope and I, and, really seeing what, the nuances of campus pantries, we found that a lot of campuses are already doing this work, and really should be supported by the state and community partners to keep these programs afloat. So, in a survey conducted about food insecurity on college campuses in May of 2021, 78% of respondents shared that their campus is helping their students with food insecurity in at least one way. So that means, they're standing up a food pantry, they're helping connect students to resources, both on campus and outside, or just spreading awareness about the issue. So, as we're kind of working on this issue, we had a really exciting change happen to our SNAP rules here in Ohio. And I'm really happy that Mark was able to kind of go through the national rules when it comes to SNAP and kind of see and kind of show Ohio as a highlight and as a leader of what we can really do to make sure that we're supporting students while they're earning their degree and really support our future workforce. So in October of 2023, the state of Ohio, alongside the Ohio General Assembly, instituted new SNAP rules for eligible college students. We essentially went back to the COVID era rules, like Mark outlined. So income eligible college students are eligible for SNAP and have already satisfied the SNAP work requirement, so long as they are at least half-time at their higher ed institution. This includes both 2-year and 4-year. They're enrolled in an accredited institution with a major that leads to an in-demand occupation, and they are eligible to participate in work study or have a student aid index EFC EFC of $0. So this is a really incredible change. We're really excited about this. We understand that this means that our next generation of our workforce will be healthy, trained, and prepared. They are able to access resources while they're obtaining their degree, so that they can focus on learning and focus on training, and don't have to focus on where their next meal comes from. I think this is also an acknowledgement, and going back to Mark's list of misconceptions, I think this is now an acknowledgement that college is workforce training and really should be treated as such, as part of our SNAP rules. So, a college student now does not have to satisfy the work requirement in another way, like working the 20 hours a week on top of their normal course load. I think this also will allow eligible students to enroll in SNAP while they earn their degree, which will help them secure better paying jobs post-graduation and will really support health outcomes, which I think we all can get behind. So in addition to that, I want to talk about kind of this layered, landscape. We need, not only do we need, and are really thrilled to see those SNAP rules put in place, but we also want to make sure that, folks are able to access resources on campus that they may need. So, HB 590, the Hunger Free Campus Grant Program, was introduced in May of 2024 in the Ohio General Assembly by Rep. Brennan and Rep. Dobos. They have been great partners in this work, really dedicated to seeing this bill through and really passionate about the issue. This bill essentially establishes a state-funded grant program to support student basic needs. It funds the program at $2.5 million over 2 years and really allows colleges and universities to stand up and maintain campus pantries, emergency fund programs, meal swipe programs, data collection, and really everything in between. I think it's also an acknowledgement that, colleges and universities may require different programs or solutions to these really complex issues, depending on if they are a four-year institution or a community college, or, if they have a big commuter population or whatever it may be. It's really making sure that solution is flexible. So our bill sponsors gave testimony this past June, which was really exciting. You can see a screenshot of that there. I really want to underscore the importance of the fact that, this is bringing a lot of partners together. Ohio can support basic needs on campus. That work is already underway already. Throughout the pandemic, there was a real acknowledgement from our higher education partners that their students need to be connected to resources if they're struggling to make ends meet. They know that they will not be able to see their degree through if they aren't able to access those resources. So it is really, truly in the best interest of not only the student, but also the university community to make sure that, folks have access to resources. And like Hope had mentioned earlier, our food bank network is also trying our best to connect campus pantries to our resources, to our ability to purchase large quantities of food for less than retail price, making sure that we are purchasing foods that are culturally sensitive and culturally appropriate for the folks that we're serving. We're able to do that in a much more efficient way than what a small campus pantry can do. So there's a lot of partnerships and programs that we're kind of working on to make sure that we're doing our part, but also the state of Ohio can also really support and lift up the work that's already being done so that we can have a healthy future workforce that will stay, who will learn in Ohio and also stay in Ohio after their graduation. So with that, there's more work that needs to be done. Hunger Free Campus bill is still in the Ohio House, and we're looking to see if something happens to move after the election, but still committed to this work, as we start a new General Assembly. I wanted to mention here that there is an action center that advocates can go on and look at. There's a lot more information that you can go and search, but also a couple of actions that you can take to make sure that your elected officials and other stakeholders know that this is really an issue in our community. And then I also wanted to mention that if you would be interested in joining our Hunger Free Campus Coalition, feel free to scan that QR code and join us. We hold, I think we're up to monthly meetings now, and it's just a great opportunity to talk with folks who are engaged in this work. So with that, I want to thank you all so much. Looking forward to the discussion afterwards, and I'm going to pass it back to Hope.
Thanks, Sarah. So last but certainly not least is Jolara O'Harra, a mother, an advocate, a neighbor, an educator, and a friend of ours. Jolara is incredible, and I'm so grateful that she was able to join us today. She has continued to work tirelessly to elevate her own experiences to advocate for policy change for all. She has never, ever shied away from opportunities to tell her story. She has been featured on our podcast. She's provided feedback to our SNAP state agency on their forms. She has even told her story to our state house staffers at our General Assembly staff over at our state house here in Ohio. And that was all this year alone, in addition to being a college student herself, a teacher's aide, and an advocate on and for other issues outside of food security. She is a very busy woman, and I frankly don't know how she does it. But regardless, I am grateful to be in kinship with her. Jolara, take it away.
My birthday because it feels like my birthday now. It really does. Thank you. And I have to say before I say anything else that this news is just amazing and it makes me have a great deal of hope, which right now I think for a lot of us is in short supply. I think that no matter if you're eating or not, eating well or not eating at all, we could all deal with a healthy dose of hope. And I'm definitely getting that from this today. And I can't thank you enough for that. I am a mom. I have an amazing 15-year-old. I am also kind of a bonus adult to 505 tiny people at the elementary school where I'm an aide. And you may think you have everything together until a 6-year-old looks at you and says, Miss O'Hara, did you eat today? So, getting that kind of feedback from tiny people, and we do have that tendency where all of us at work, but at home with our own kids or our bonus kids or the neighbor kids, even the bratty kids in the restaurants occasionally, and you ask them first when they're having a difficult day, have you eaten? What did you eat? Um, I identified as Mark was speaking and as Theresa was speaking, I identified with several of those criteria that I'm a solo parent trying to juggle all of the plates, so to speak, to keep us housed and healthy and fed and cared for. My son and I and our dog, who has been extorting me for pretzels since we've been on this Zoom. If she does bark, it's because the last pretzel was not quite enough to keep her calm while I finish this important Zoom meeting with you all. But all of this criteria, all of the spinning plates, um, to be able to shout out to Columbus State as I return to school to get my degree and my licensure to become a full-time educator here in Columbus, Ohio. The kiddos that I work with every day, I feel like they are such deserving tiny humans for all of us to put forth the very best that we can for them because uh, we I feel that's the most important work that we could do, and none of us can do it hungry. Shouting out to the Student Advocacy Center, C State Cares at Columbus State, and the Mid Ohio Market at Columbus State, because those resources exist at Columbus State and in our communities with the local food banks that we are able to take advantage of to keep all of the plates spinning in the air. Amazing. And saying too that looking around campus as I go to school or as I know my colleagues who are ready to build a firmer foundation in these uncertain times, knowing that the people who want to do the most good seem to face lots of obstacles on the way to reinventing yourself to be that good human in another person's life. So knowing again that this work is being done, that resources are becoming available, that the stigma of being a college student and you get to be starving as a rite of passage, knowing that that is going away, all gives me a lot of hope and want to offer my experience and my perspective as necessary. I will drop my email in the chat, but just so fortunate to be here in this room and to be able to be part of this and watch this movement happen is just incredible. I can't thank you all enough.
Thank you so much, Laura, as always, for your time, for your energy, for your expertise, for all of it. We deeply appreciate you. Those that have been keeping track of the Ohio Association of Foodbanks and our work this year have likely seen Jolara. Maybe Sarah, if you have 2 seconds to drop our podcast, just for those who might be interested in hearing more from Jolara and other work that we're working on here in Ohio. But I also just wanted to see if folks had any questions. Feel free to come off mute, type in the chat, etc. Just wanted to give folks an opportunity to ask any questions, but I know there's been few asked in the chat that have been answered so far.
This is Krista Kiesling. Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I have a balloon machine in my office today.
Yes, we can.
But okay, good. I just want to thank all of you. It's Owens Community College is up here outside of Toledo. We've been doing this work since 2012, and we're definitely one of the very early adopters who were looked at like we were all nuts when we decided to open the food pantry. And so I've had this conversation several times in the last couple of weeks. It's so exciting to see the amount of work and the level of commitment, especially from the younger professionals in the higher ed realm who are leading the charge with this, because it's not a big deal anymore. It's certainly not making people uncomfortable anymore. It's an expectation. I think for campuses, I was able to work with the team to establish the new CAS standards for basic needs resource support, which was super exciting. So I ate up every word that you all shared, and I just want to thank you all. It's nice to know as an aging academic that the flag is being picked up and run with. So thank you so much.
No, and thank you, Krista. Actually, I'm gonna dig up Sarah, the wonderful article from Owens Community College earlier this year about this work, and drop that in the chat because it's definitely worth elevating.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you so much, McKenna. You are a saint in this work too. Awesome. Sarah, if you want to close us out while I find this article, that would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for attending, and thank you to our panelists for their great words and insights and research. We'll make sure to follow up with a recording and slides after this webinar so that you all have that. And I've been taking note of some of the resources mentioned, and I'll make sure to follow up with those as well. But I want to thank you all and hope you have a great rest of your Monday.
Thank you all so much.